The first notice arrived like a punch to the gut, 3 days after the heaviest snowstorm in years. A crisp white envelope taped to my front door, screaming, "Violation, inadequate snow removal. Fine 100 per day." I stood there in Briar Hollow, Montana, blinking at my driveway, spotless after 2 hours of early morning shoveling. Megan handed me coffee as I chipped ice from the mailbox. Every inch of the path was cleared. Every corner swept. We had done everything right. Yet, Linda Carver, our HOA president, insisted it wasn't enough. Somehow, overnight, a rule had appeared demanding a 3-foot radius around the fire hydrant, a rule I had never seen, never agreed to. What started as a snow complaint quickly spiraled into something deeper. Questions only made things worse, and it became clear this wasn't about snow. It was about control, about power, about making life difficult for anyone who dared stand their ground. By the time it ended, I hadn't just defended my driveway. I uncovered the hidden rules, the petty punishments, and the true nature of the people running our HOA. Hit subscribe to HOA Gone Wild and drop a comment. Where are you watching from? Megan and I had called Briar Hollow home for 12 years, nestled between pine-covered hills and a frozen lake that gleamed like glass in winter. It was the kind of town where life moved slow and neighbors waved from their porches. Kids rode bikes until dusk, the streets were quiet, and the mountains held a kind of calm that seeped into your bones. The HOA existed in the background, mostly harmless. Dues kept the entrance sign landscaped, the decorations seasonal. Nothing intrusive. That changed the moment Linda Carver assumed the presidency. Linda had lived here for 8 years, but her board tenure transformed her. Weekly emails titled "Community Compliance Updates" began as polite reminders: trash pickup, holiday lights, nothing anyone minded. Soon, the emails became exacting, almost surgical. Grass height measured to the inch, paint colors approved in painstaking detail, driveway cleanliness held to invisible standards. I did my best to follow the rules. I didn't want drama, and until the snowstorm, I'd never had any reason to question them. Then the storm hit. 2 feet of heavy, wet snow fell overnight, sticking to everything and freezing solid. At 4:30 a.m., I was out with shovel and snowblower, my breath fogging in the icy air. I cleared my driveway, shoveled the walkway, and even helped Mr. Daniels, our elderly neighbor, dig out his porch. By sunrise, the world was white, quiet, perfect. 3 days later, a crisp envelope taped to my front door changed everything a fine. I called the HOA office immediately. "Linda says you failed to clear the hydrant area properly," Eric Vaughn, the property manager, said with a flat tone. "I cleared it," I replied, incredulous. "There's no rule about 3 feet." "There is now," he said. That line haunted me. There is now. I combed through the HOA covenants. No mention of specific hydrant clearance. The only snow clause required homeowners to maintain safe access to sidewalks and community infrastructure. Safe access. Not a 3-foot radius. I emailed Linda. Her response arrived within minutes. "Ryan, safety is our priority. The board has interpreted the rule to require a 3-foot clearance. This ensures fire department access. Failure to comply will result in daily fines." As interpreted, the word set off alarms. When I looked around the neighborhood, the hypocrisy was glaring. 2 houses down, the hydrant was buried under snow, untouched. Across the street, no fines. I took photos. Not to provoke, but because it didn't make sense. When the second fine came, adding up to 300, Megan's eyes met mine across the kitchen table. "This feels personal," she said. And in that moment, I realized the storm wasn't just a natural event. It was the first crack in a pattern of control, the beginning of something far more deliberate. It wasn't about snow, it was about power. And from that day forward, I started paying attention, watching, documenting, preparing. Because if the HOA thought I would quietly comply, They were about to learn that sometimes standing your ground isn't just necessary, it's unavoidable. Every rule, every email, every arbitrary fine was a test, and I was done letting them write the rules on the fly. From that morning on, Briar Hollow's quiet streets would no longer be so peaceful. For them, at least. Megan and I didn't just want to clear our name anymore. We wanted the truth out, and we were ready to fight. I tried to handle it the way any reasonable person would. Calmly, methodically. I requested a meeting with the board. I printed the covenants. I brought photographs of other hydrants around the neighborhood that weren't cleared to any 3-foot standard. I thought facts would matter. I thought fairness might prevail. The meeting was held in the small clubhouse by the frozen lake. Folding chairs lined the room. Fluorescent lights hummed overhead. The air smelled faintly of stale coffee and varnish. Linda sat at the front, clipboard in hand, her posture rigid. "I'm not refusing to clear snow," I said, trying to keep my tone steady. "I just want consistency. Rules apply to everyone, right?" She smiled, but it didn't reach her eyes. "Ryan, compliance is not optional," she said. "But neither is fairness," I replied. The room went quiet. A few board members shifted in their seats. Then Linda dropped a bomb I wasn't prepared for. "The board voted last week to adopt the 3-foot hydrant policy," she said almost casually. "When was that communicated?" I asked. "It was noted in the minutes," she said. I knew the minutes had been posted online 2 days after my first fine. Retroactive enforcement. I left that meeting frustrated, empty-handed, and with another warning notice waiting in my inbox. Within the week, new violations began to appear. My trash bin was deemed visible from the street for over 12 hours. My mailbox post had chip paint, suddenly a violation. My front yard snow pile was labeled excessively high. Each one carried a fine. It felt personal, like someone was combing my property with a magnifying glass, searching for any imperfection to punish. Neighbors started whispering. Jerry Collins, who lived behind me, stopped me one afternoon as I cleared ice from the driveway. "She's targeting you," he said quietly. "You're not the only one noticing." Most people, though, stayed silent. Fear ran through the neighborhood like a cold draft. The HOA had the power to lion properties, and that threat was enough to keep mouths shut. Then came the community-wide email. Linda didn't name me directly, but it didn't have to. The message was clear. Certain residents are resisting safety measures and putting others at risk. Megan was furious when she read it. "They're painting you as the villain," she said, her voice tight with anger. And in that moment, I understood something crucial. This wasn't about snow. This wasn't about hydrants or paint or trash bins. It was about intimidation, about control, about sending a message. Don't question authority. Don't make waves. If I backed down now, it would never stop. So I didn't. I documented every violation, every email, every fine, every conversation. I started logging the time and date of each notice, taking photographs of every claimed infraction. I even began recording phone calls, knowing that evidence might be my only shield. Linda's emails became sharper, the fines larger, and the tone more punitive. Yet with each attack, my resolve grew. Each notice was a reminder that the system was stacked against me, but also proof that exposing the truth mattered. I realized something else. Fear could be contagious, but courage could be too. I needed to act not just for Megan and me, but for anyone else being quietly bullied. This wasn't just a snow dispute anymore. It was a fight to reclaim fairness, to show that rules exist for everyone equally, not just for the people who enforce them. And so the pressure mounted, but so did my determination. The more they tried to push me down, the harder I pushed back. Every violation, every fine, every whisper of intimidation became fuel. Because I knew, in my gut, That once you start letting fear dictate your actions, it never stops. And I wasn't about to let fear win. Not in my home, not in my neighborhood, not in my life. This was war. Quiet, bureaucratic, frustrating, and utterly relentless, and I was ready to fight. If they thought snow was their weapon, they were about to find out that persistence, documentation, and determination could be far more powerful. The shift didn't come from me. It came from someone I never expected. One chilly evening, just as the sun was fading behind the pines, Mr. Daniels knocked on my door. His hands trembled slightly, but his eyes were sharp, alive with a kind of quiet defiance. "I used to serve on the board," he said softly. "Years ago." He handed me a manila folder, worn at the edges, stuffed with papers. Old meeting records, financial statements, emails, policy drafts. Linda pushed through several changes without proper votes. He whispered. I stepped down because I didn't agree. Some things, they shouldn't be done in the shadows. I spent the night poring over every page, my head spinning. Line after line told the same story: fines collected, deposited into a discretionary fund, a fund not mentioned anywhere in the annual budget shared with homeowners. No transparency, no oversight, no accountability. And the hydrant rule, the one they had retroactively applied to me, had no formal vote, no official approval. It was arbitrary, weaponized, and convenient. But the most striking discovery came when I looked at the photos from the same week that my fines were piling up. Linda's own driveway had a hydrant on the corner. The clearance, barely 1 foot. I took pictures, carefully, not for revenge, not for anger, but for proof. Evidence that would make it impossible for her to claim fairness or legitimacy. The next board meeting was looming. Tuesday, 1 week away. I didn't go alone this time. Jerry came, wary but resolute. 3 other neighbors joined, each carrying their own records, their own photos, their own frustrations. The room that once felt oppressive now had weight behind it. We weren't just a single voice crying for fairness anymore. I reviewed the plan with them quietly in my living room. We would present facts, photos, and documents. No shouting, no personal attacks, just the truth, laid bare in a way the board couldn't ignore. By the time Tuesday arrived, my anxiety was tempered by purpose. The clubhouse felt smaller somehow, the fluorescent lights harsh, but the presence of allies gave me confidence. Linda sat at the front, clipboard in hand, her smile fixed and brittle. But she couldn't hide the flicker of unease as the first neighbor stepped forward, presenting a photo of his buried hydrant, untouched and overlooked by the board. Then another and another. When it was my turn, I laid out the folder, pointing to meeting notes, financial statements, and the photos of Linda's own hydrant. "I'm not here to attack anyone personally," I said evenly. "I'm here to ask the board to follow its own rules, to act transparently, to treat all homeowners equally." The room went still. The weight of the evidence was undeniable. A few board members shifted uncomfortably. Even Eric Vaughn, the property manager, looked uncertain. Linda's smile faltered. This is not how things are usually done," she said, trying to regain control. "But it's exactly how they should be done," I replied. "If rules are going to be enforced, they must be enforced fairly. Retroactive fines, secret funds, selective enforcement, these are not acceptable." For the first time, I saw the board hesitate. The power dynamic shifted subtly, imperceptibly, but it was there. We had evidence, we had numbers, we had photos, and we had the support of neighbors who had quietly suffered, but were now willing to stand up. By the end of that meeting, we hadn't won every argument. Linda hadn't resigned, and the discretionary fund hadn't been dissolved on the spot. But the tone had changed. She could no longer ignore scrutiny. Every decision would now be under the microscope. Every action documented. Walking home that evening, Megan held my hand tightly. "This is just the beginning," she said. And she was right. The turning point wasn't a single victory. It wasn't a dramatic confrontation or a public showdown. It was proof, evidence that the system could be challenged, that rules could be enforced fairly, that even a small group of homeowners could push back against unchecked authority. And for the first time in months, I felt something I hadn't felt in a long time: hope. The fight wasn't over, but the momentum had shifted. The neighborhood was no longer just under Linda's control, and we weren't just homeowners anymore. We were a community awake, aware, and ready to hold the board accountable. The snowstorm that had seemed like the start of a personal attack had become the catalyst for change. And change, it seemed, was unstoppable when backed by truth. Before the meeting, I sought legal advice. In the nearest town, I met with Olivia Grant, a sharp, calm attorney who had handled HOA disputes before. She went through the covenants with a fine-tooth comb. "They can interpret rules," she said, "but they can't invent them out of thin air without following due process. And selective enforcement, that's legally risky." She also highlighted something crucial. HOA boards are bound by state open meeting laws. Any new policy must be properly voted on, recorded, and communicated to homeowners before it can be enforced. Which, of course, hadn't happened. Armed with this knowledge, I went into the next board meeting ready. I presented it all: photographs of other hydrants buried in snow, financial discrepancies hinting at a secret discretionary fund, and the glaring example of Linda's own hydrant barely cleared. Gasps rippled through the room. Board members shifted uncomfortably in their seats. Even some homeowners in the audience whispered among themselves, their expressions a mix of disbelief and relief. Linda tried to regain control, her voice sharp and defensive. "These accusations are inappropriate." I held up a folder. "Then let's vote. Tonight." And that's when something unexpected happened. Eric Vaughn, the property manager who had previously delivered fines and explanations with unflinching neutrality, spoke up. "I never received a formal document showing a board vote on this policy," he admitted. The room went silent. Linda's posture stiffened, her confidence wavering for the first time. The weight of evidence, the scrutiny of neighbors, and the legal realities Olivia had explained were converging. For a moment, it felt like a victory. But I also knew the fight wasn't over. Linda had power, and she knew how to push boundaries. 2 days later, the real escalation hit. A crisp letter arrived in our mailbox. The HOA was placing a lien warning on my property for unpaid fines totaling $1,000. That moment changed everything. This was no longer about snow, hydrants, or petty rules. This was an act of intimidation, a weaponized escalation designed to threaten our financial security. Megan was furious when she saw the letter. "This is beyond unfair," she said, gripping it tightly. "They're trying to bully us out of our home." I felt the same. But I also realized that this was the moment that clarified our strategy. We couldn't just react. We couldn't back down. If we wanted real change, we needed a plan, one that combined legal support, community backing, and careful documentation. First, we continued collecting evidence. Every email, every fine, every irregularity was scanned and logged. Photographs of inconsistencies were time-stamped. Notes of conversations with board members, neighbors, and the property manager were meticulously recorded. Second, we rallied support quietly but decisively. Jerry, Mr. Daniels, and other homeowners who had endured similar treatment were ready to stand publicly if necessary. The group expanded, becoming a network of witnesses and allies. Third, we involved legal counsel proactively. Olivia reviewed every notice and every alleged violation, advising on which actions were enforceable, which were arbitrary, and which could expose the HOA to liability. Finally, we prepared for confrontation at the next meeting, confident that documentation and support would shift the dynamic. This wasn't just about defending ourselves anymore. It was about creating a framework that prevented selective enforcement from happening to anyone else. The lien notice was meant to intimidate, but it had the opposite effect. It clarified the stakes, solidified our focus, and turned frustration into strategy. We weren't just homeowners fighting fines anymore. We were a united front. Every photo, every document, every neighbor standing with us became a piece of armor. And for the first time, the playing field felt a little more level. Linda might have thought she could intimidate us into compliance. She might have thought secrecy and selective enforcement would protect her. But the combination of evidence, legal insight, and community support was about to show her otherwise. And from that moment on, every action the HOA took, every notice sent, every attempted fine or threat of lien would be met with scrutiny, challenge, and unwavering resistance. Because this wasn't just about clearing snow anymore. It was about holding power accountable. And we were ready. Olivia didn't waste time. She drafted a formal demand letter, meticulously citing improper enforcement, selective fines, and a breach of fiduciary duty. Every paragraph was precise, every claim backed by documents, photos, and timestamps. It was impossible to dismiss as trivial. Within days, the HOA called a special homeowners meeting. The clubhouse, usually quiet and sparsely attended, was packed. Chairs lined the walls, standing room was full. The energy was electric, tense, charged with anticipation. Neighbors whispered, eyes darting toward the front where Linda sat, clipboard clutched tightly, her posture rigid but her confidence faltering under the weight of scrutiny. Voices rose immediately. Accusations, complaints, and frustrations flew in all directions. It was chaos tempered by purpose, people finally speaking up about years of arbitrary enforcement. Linda insisted, her voice sharp and defensive, that every decision she'd made was in the best interest of the community. I stood, steady but firm. Then why wasn't your hydrant cleared? The room froze. Silence fell like a heavy blanket. Jerry, calm but deliberate, stepped forward and projected the photograph onto the large clubhouse screen. There it was, Linda's own hydrant, barely cleared. A stark contrast to the fines she had levied against others. A murmur ran through the crowd. Someone at the back muttered, "Unbelievable." Others nodded, eyes wide. The hypocrisy was undeniable. For the first time, Linda hesitated, searching the room for support, but the momentum had already shifted. Homeowners leaned forward, murmurs of agreement and outrage spreading like wildfire. The board attempted to maintain control, but their authority had been fractured. Questions about proper voting procedures, transparency of funds, and selective enforcement filled the air. Each objection Linda raised was met with evidence, with photos, with the clear documentation that had been painstakingly collected. Finally, the board voted to suspend fine collections, pending a full review. It wasn't the end, but it was a victory. The first real check on her unchecked power. Linda objected loudly, protesting the decision, but her voice sounded smaller, less commanding than before. The room's energy had shifted. The tide had turned. The neighbors who had once stayed silent now whispered, pointed, and demanded accountability. That night, walking home, the chill of the Montana air felt different. Not ominous or heavy, but sharp, clear, like a new beginning. Megan squeezed my hand. "It's working," she said quietly, and it was. The confrontation had shown that even deeply entrenched authority could be challenged when evidence, community, and persistence came together. The fight wasn't over. There would be more meetings, more emails, and surely more attempts to intimidate. But for the first time, the rules applied not just to everyone else, they applied to Linda too. The snowstorm that had seemed like the start of a personal vendetta had ignited a movement. What began as fines and harassment had become a test of transparency, fairness, and accountability, and Briar Hollow was watching. Everyone had seen what could happen when homeowners refused to be silenced. We weren't just defending our property anymore. We were setting a precedent, and that made every subsequent move, every rule enforcement, and every meeting an opportunity to uphold fairness for ourselves and for everyone else in the community. The confrontation had shifted more than fines and policies. It had shifted power, and it was a shift that couldn't be undone. The tension didn't fade after the confrontation. It escalated. Homeowners demanded an independent audit of the HOA's finances and enforcement practices. Reluctantly, the board agreed. 6 weeks later, the results arrived. They were devastating for Linda and the board's credibility. Funds had been misallocated, deposited into discretionary accounts without transparency or approval. Policies had been enforced without proper procedure, and selective targeting of certain homeowners, myself included, was documented clearly in emails and internal communications. Every claim I had made, every photograph I had taken, every note I had logged was corroborated. The evidence was irrefutable. Even the most staunch supporters of Linda couldn't deny it. The pressure became insurmountable. Before the board could officially vote to remove her, Linda submitted her resignation, quietly, without fanfare. The woman who had wielded arbitrary fines and intimidation left the community she had dominated for years. But the resolution didn't stop at her resignation. Homeowners quickly organized a vote to formally invalidate all fines that had been improperly issued. My fines, the Lien threat, the fines against others, all of them were struck from the record. The lien warning against my property was withdrawn, erased as though it had never existed. A vote of no confidence passed unanimously. The board's credibility had been shattered, and the message was clear. The community would no longer tolerate arbitrary enforcement or secret funds. Poetic justice didn't come with fireworks, shouting, or drama. It came quietly through paperwork, legal procedures, and meticulous record-keeping, the very tools Linda had misused against me. Every piece of evidence we had collected, every ally we had rallied, had culminated in accountability. Walking through Briar Hollow that morning, the snow still crisp underfoot, I felt a weight lift. Megan smiled, relief and vindication in her eyes. The neighborhood was quiet, but the undercurrent of change was palpable. People whispered, smiled, and exchanged glances that said, "Things are different now." It was proof that power could be checked, that even the most entrenched authority could be held accountable when rules, transparency, and community action came together. And while the storm that started it all had long melted away, the lessons it left behind, resilience, vigilance, and the courage to stand up, would remain forever. Briar Hollow had learned something important. Fairness, once restored, leaves a mark stronger than fear ever could. The morning after the vote, Briar Hollow felt different, lighter, less tense. The snow on the streets sparkled without the shadow of scrutiny hanging over it. Megan noticed it immediately as we stepped outside with our coffee. "It feels like we got our town back," she said, her voice soft but full of relief. Marcus Hale, the new interim HOA president, moved quickly. Within days, he implemented reforms that were as practical as they were restorative. Clear, written snow guidelines replaced the vague, arbitrary rules that had caused so much strife. Homeowners would now receive warnings before fines, no surprises, no retroactive penalties. Budgets were posted monthly, transparent and detailed, leaving no room for secret funds or discretionary accounts. Even the hydrant policy was transformed. It was no longer a weapon of selective enforcement, but a community effort. Clearance was recommended, not mandated, and volunteers organized to help elderly residents with heavy snow. What had once been a source of conflict became a way for neighbors to connect, to help each other, to rebuild trust. Life in Briar Hollow returned to its quiet rhythm. Children's laughter filled the streets again. Neighbors waved as they passed, and the tension that had gripped the town for months melted away like morning frost. People spoke to each other with ease instead of caution. Linda's house sold that spring. She moved out quietly, without drama. No one spoke her name in conversation. It was as if her tenure had been erased, leaving only the lessons behind. The town didn't celebrate her departure, but it felt lighter, freer, more just. For Megan and me, the experience left an indelible mark. We had stood up, documented, persisted, and ultimately restored fairness, not just for ourselves, but for every homeowner who had felt powerless. The sense of community returned stronger than ever, because people now knew their voices mattered. Briar Hollow had survived a storm far more chilling than winter snow, a storm of fear, intimidation, and abuse of power, and it had emerged not just intact, but renewed. The lesson stayed: rules must be fair, transparency is non-negotiable, and a united community can hold even the most entrenched authority accountable. Even now, years later, when snow falls thick and silent, there is a quiet confidence in our neighborhood. People clear their driveways, help each other, and no one fears arbitrary fines. What started as a battle over a few inches of snow became a lasting victory for integrity, fairness, and community. Briar Hollow was no longer just a place we lived. It was a town we helped reclaim, and a reminder that courage, persistence, and evidence can shift even the heaviest snow from a weapon into a story of triumph. Now, every winter, when snow blankets Briar Hollow, I still wake up early to shovel. Not out of fear of fines or scrutiny, just because it's my home, my driveway, my neighborhood. The hydrant at the edge of my yard gets cleared, not measured, not inspected, just cleared. No clipboard, no letters, no fear of arbitrary enforcement. The difference is simple, but powerful: accountability. When authority is unchecked, it can overreach. But calm persistence, evidence, and community support can restore balance. I never set out to take down the HOA. I just wanted fairness. I wanted rules that applied to everyone equally, and a neighborhood where people could live without arbitrary intimidation. Sometimes standing up quietly, documenting carefully, and persisting patiently is the strongest move you can make. Briar Hollow is quieter now, freer now, lighter in ways that aren't always visible, but deeply felt, and every snowfall reminds me that fairness, once restored, leaves a mark stronger than fear ever could. If you want more true stories like this, hit that subscribe button to HOA Gone Wild. Drop a comment too. Where are you watching from? Your story, your voice matters just as much as ours.